It has been a day of direct accusations against his stepmother, in essence, that she was determined to rebuild her reputation at all costs.
That made her dangerous because of the connections that she was forging within the British press. And there was open willingness on both sides to trade of information.
Harry's enemies in the press responded with scorn after he claimed their loathing was fueled by his hacking cases. It is a war of words that shows no sign of abating tonight. But what damage is it doing to the monarchy and the reputations of everyone within it? Chris will assess. Also on News at 10. The government's plan to get people out of hospitals and into care homes. Strike talks end with little progress, say unions. After the storming of the Capitol building in Washington, an attempt to storm the Congress building in Brazil, another assault on democracy, and a giant leap for British kind. We finally launch into space from UK soil.
I'm excited about seeing the rocket because I haven't actually seen a real one before.
Since I was little, I've watched the moon landing. I know this isn't the same thing, but it's just as exciting.
This is On TV, News at 10, with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Whether or not you watch my interview with Prince Harry or anyone else's over the last 24 hours, you cannot have missed the impact of his claims that certain members of the royal family are in bed with the devil, as he describes the tabloid press, that his stepmother, Camilla, now, of course, the Queen Consort, was the villain who built up her own reputation at the expense of his. Even that accusations we thought had been made about racism within the royal family were, in fact, about what he called unconscious bias. His comments have been raw, deeply personal, and yes, unsparing. At one point, Harry told me he no longer recognises his own father or brother, nor they him. Some may have been sympathetic, others angry. Perhaps everyone can agree that it is all desperately sad. So is there any hope for an end to this incredibly bitter and damaging family row that is now being played out on a world stage?
During their short time working in the royal family, Harry and Meghan gave the impression in public that all was well between them and his stepmother. But now we know neither he nor William wanted his father to marry Camilla.
She was the villain.
Harry told American network CBS the Queen Consort had a dangerous relationship with the press.
How was she dangerous?
Because of the need for her to rehabilitate her image.
That made her dangerous?
That made her dangerous because of the connections that she was forging within the British press. And there was open willingness on both sides to trade of information.
Camilla's reputation after the death of Diana did indeed need repairing, and the palace worked on it for many years, from the first public engagement with Prince Charles in 1999 to their marriage in Windsor in 2005, with the apparent blessing, or so we were told at the time, of his sons. But what is not in doubt in all of Harry's new interviews, this one is Good Morning America, is that his relationship with his stepmother is, to put it mildly, complex.
She had a reputation or an image to rehabilitate.
And what is your relationship with Camilla now?
We haven't spoken for a long time. I love every member of my family, despite the differences. So when I see her, we're perfectly pleasant with each other. She's my stepmother. I don't look at her as an evil stepmother.
And in his ITV interview, the conversation turned to what Harry described as a deal with the devil.
I want to sort of just briefly talk about your stepmother in the press. You say that your interests were sacrificed on her PR altar, to quote.
Those certain members have decided to get into bed with the devil, right? To rehabilitate their image.
Yeah.
But the moment that rehabilitation comes at the detriment of others, me, other members of my family, then that's where I draw the line.
What has also received a lot of attention today is the issue of racism, and in particular the interview Harry and Meghan gave nearly 2 years ago to Oprah Winfrey, when they revealed an unnamed member of the royal family had asked about the skin colour of their baby.
And also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't.
Well,
the British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they were racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
there was concern about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
Right.
For me, the difference is unconscious bias and racism. But if you are called out for unconscious bias, you need to make that right.
The late Queen, Harry, claimed knew about it all, the depth of this family rift, and he says it even extended to the flight to Scotland on the day his grandmother died.
I asked my brother, I said, what are your plans? How are you and Kate getting up there? And then a couple of hours later, you know, all of the family members that live within the Windsor and Ascot area were jumping on a plane together, a plane with 12, 14, maybe 16 seats.
You were not invited on that plane?
I was not invited.
No surprise to learn then that contact between Harry and his family is now non-existent.
Do you speak to William now? Do you text?
Currently, no.
Do you speak to your dad?
We haven't spoken for quite a while. No, not recently.
In bookshops tonight, they are 90 minutes away from being able to sell copies of Spare, and Harry's book is being unloaded in the last few hours. Whether it sells well or not is no longer the issue. It's all about the content and what we all now know. Chris Ship, News at 10.
Well, for all the shock revelations of recent days, Harry's anguished relationship with the press was no big secret. What was perhaps news to many was the scale of the task that he has set himself. A suicide mission his father is alleged to have told him to reform the country's media landscape. His defence for the quite startling way he laid bare the Windsor's secrets was that his family deliberately leaked stories and smears to the press that destroyed his reputation and that of his wife, leaving him with no choice but to tell his version of events, his truth if you like, to contradict them. He added that his refusal so far to settle hacking cases with various newspapers had further enraged the press against him. But is his account of a conspiracy between the press and the royal family true? Or is it all a bit more complicated than that?
Since falling in love with Meghan, he's rarely been out of the tabloids. The couple revered at first and then reviled. In stories, Prince Harry claims the royal family didn't just fail to put right, but sometimes provided. A culture of considered leaks, recognised by some.
The royal family and their aides have a very long history of leaking and planting stories. I know that to be true as somebody who covered the royals and has been the recipient of what I guess you could call leaks. And certainly I've been told things with a view to those appearing as from unnamed sources.
Today, both Buckingham and Kensington Palace have met Harry's suggestion of collusion with silence. But just take a look at this story on Meghan's alleged bullying, which quotes royal aides. Not that every journalist believes it's as deliberate as that.
I would say categorically, no negative story was ever planted with me, given to me. And I was the royal editor of the Mail on Sunday and the Sun, two of the biggest tabloids in Britain. It is much more complicated than the one-sided opinion that Harry gives.
But if the way British royals choose to work with the press is open to interpretation, rather than getting into bed with the devil, as Harry describes it, it's the tabloids that he judges the real evil.
The Daily Mail accused of phone tapping, spying and even bribing police for information. Those targeted are said to include celebrities, royalty and the mother of murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence.
Over a decade after the phone hacking scandal began, Harry is amongst those bringing new cases against 3 British newspaper groups. They deny any wrongdoing, but for the first time he's linked his treatment by the press to that action.
Specifically with phone hacking, that I put in my claims over 3 years ago. and I'm still waiting. So one might assume that a lot of this, from their perspective, is retaliation and trying to intimidate me to settle rather than take it to court.
But he won't be doing that.
The Faustian pact that was drawn up between the royal family, the monarchy and the press many, many years ago, I suspect, has sort of come into the 21st century finally, and Harry's been the one to sort of pull the lever and say enough.
It won't be pretty. Already the papers are calling out Harry's every inconsistency. A man whose own father, we now know, warned that taking on the press would be a suicide mission. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Well, the UK may be famous, or perhaps these days infamous, for its stiff upper lip. Such niceties are less common across the Atlantic. In the Californian community, which counts Harry and Meghan as neighbours, residents had particular cause for interest in the recent interviews. There, Prince Harry's emotional honesty was greeted largely with sympathy and understanding. Perhaps no surprise, it's the place, he says, his family feels safe.
In the well-heeled community the Sussexes now call home, their slew of TV interviews has been the talk of the town. Montecito's most famous couple came here to build a new life together. This place affords them and many other celebrities discreet privacy, but this week they've put themselves firmly in the global media spotlight.
I will sit here and speak truth to you.
We brought together some of Harry and Meghan's neighbours to watch one of the 3 interviews he's given to US TV networks. The revelation that for years Harry believed his mother was still alive left some open-mouthed.
It appears that he was in denial for years, and that to me was stunning.
I didn't understand Harry's upset about what he's doing, because I think he's creating this schism between his family that he says he's not trying to do.
He's done very well in trying to articulate the pain that he felt, that many of us feel.
In Santa Barbara, the local bookstore's shelves chronicle the story of the Windsors. Tomorrow, another volume will be added, penned by one of their own.
Maybe I will read it, like talking about it and like hearing that it's a big deal and that like people are really wondering what he has to say. I think it would be cool to read it.
I doubt I'll read the whole thing, but I'm sure I'll read part of it.
It's impossible to know if behind these gates Prince Harry and Meghan will be watching the interviews go out and the subsequent reaction to them. The couple have repeatedly stressed their desire for privacy, but this week they will be facing media scrutiny like never before. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Montecito, California.
And Chris is here to talk about all this. Tempted to, yeah, how long have we got? Tempted to ask you whether you thought all this was coming when you traded being a deputy political editor for Royal Elizabeth. But anyway, that's a longer conversation. Look, days and days and days of this now, days of revelations, now days of interviews. What do you think is the damage to the monarchy? What do you think will happen next?
Look, I think tonight, really, the question is that it? I don't mean in terms of the scale, the magnitude. I think we'd all agree it's pretty big. But I mean, is that the end of Harry and Meghan's project, if you like? We've had your interview, the one on CBS, Good Morning America. There's one more to air in America tomorrow night. And, of course, as we've just seen, the books are now going on the shelves. We kind of, however, know everything now that's in the book. And I got the impression from your chats with Harry that he doesn't want to do any more. He found the whole process quite cathartic, and that's kind of it. So therefore, if this is the end, the relationship between the royal family and Harry has reached its nadir. And when you're at rock bottom, there's only one way out, and that's sort of to climb upwards. And I suppose there's a prevailing school of thought, like how can they possibly come back from this? There's an alternative school of thought, which is, well, if Harry's kind of taken racism off the table, he said everything he wants to say about his stepmother Camilla, he's kind of put it out there, what's, his disagreements with William. Is there now a moment for them to move on from this? And I think that's kind of what probably both sides are perhaps considering tonight.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Now, if you missed it, you can see my full interview with Prince Harry on ITVX, our news streaming service, as well as what he said in full to CBS, or you can scroll to the news section to catch up on the 6 key moments. Let's move on to the day's other news now, and there is no quick, no easy fix to address the immense pressure the NHS is currently under. That much health bosses have been making clear for months. But discharging patients from hospital who no longer need to be there is probably a good enough place to start. The government announced plans today to buy up thousands of beds in care homes for people to continue to recover in the community. The worry is that these short-term stays will prove only a short-term solution.
If there's one way to solve the problem in the NHS, it is to make more beds. This care home provider's already doing it for the health service, and the government's decided to buy up more spare beds across the country to help discharge patients more quickly. It will, they say, dramatically improve capacity in hospitals.
That's the right thing to do, because what it means is it frees up pressure in our hospitals. That will ease some of the burdens that we're seeing in emergency departments and ambulance waiting times.
The government announced a number of measures ready to help relieve pressure on hospitals. Block booking beds will allow 2,500 people to be released from hospital into care homes. There are currently 13,000 patients ready to leave wards in England. Other plans include expanding emergency departments by installing temporary buildings and reducing inspections in order to free up frontline staff. The boss of this care home in North London has just made 15 beds available to the NHS.
Funding goes a long way, because to procure block beds, the NHS need to be able to pay for them. So that really creates an incentive structure for care homes to be able to provide that service.
Of course, this will help to a degree, but the problem is it isn't a long-term solution. Critics will say, why wasn't the money available months ago? And to ensure that it doesn't happen again next year, there needs to be fundamental reform of health and social care.
And some believe addressing staff shortages would be a start.
Right now, there's 133,000 vacancies in the NHS and there's 165,000 vacancies in social care. So as you can imagine, any hope of really addressing the capacity challenges and the pressures that we're seeing in those two services can only be addressed by properly investing in a workforce plan.
But as ambulances continue to wait outside hospitals, it's hoped the more beds there are inside, the fewer vehicles there'll be out here. Emily Morgan, News at 10.
Well, given the workforce shortages that Emily referred to, there is an obvious need to avoid any further walkouts by existing healthcare staff. But a wave of strikes only looks more likely tonight after crisis talks with the Health Secretary were branded an insult by NHS unions, livid by the suggestion that funding could be linked to efficiency improvements.
All that the government are interested in is saying that in order to justify a payment, then we need to come up with productivity savings in the NHS. That is absolutely ludicrous. This isn't a factory we're talking about.
And Robert here joins me to talk about all this. Look, this is really turning into a kind of winter of strikes, isn't it, really? Is there any sign of some kind of end to it for NHS workers?
So I don't think things are as gloomy as Onek Asab of Unite pointed out. I mean, curiously, he wasn't actually himself in the meeting with Steve Barclay today. Another Unite member was. And when I spoke to the other unions who were at the meeting, they said, actually, the tone, the mood was rather better than Onek Asab said. And they took some heart from the fact that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, was prepared for the first time to moot the idea that there could be some money provided to NHS workers in respect of the current year. So I've done some digging. I've talked to people in the Department of Health and Social Care and also to the unions. And I think that there is a prospect of a breakthrough. And the breakthrough would be around £1,000 payment to about 1 million NHS staff. Okay, enormous number of people working in the NHS. Which would cost £1 billion as a one-off payment. Now, £1 billion to you and me is a lot of money. Actually, in the context of the NHS budget, well, considerably more than 100 billion. In the context of national debt of 2.6 trillion, £1 billion as a one-off payment isn't that much money. So you might think, actually, if there's a prospect of a breakthrough on the basis of that the government would just hand it over. But the problem is that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt aren't persuaded that it would be a one-off. They think they hand it over now, you then go into negotiations on next year's settlement, and the unions will come round again for another billion next year. So somehow, and I think Steve Barclay wants to give that billion, a way has to be found to persuade everybody it is a one-off. If it is, actually, I think that all of this could be resolved, not forever. Some of these problems are going to come back, but rather sooner in the short term than people think.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, ever since he narrowly won the election last October, Brazil has been braced for a violent rejection of its new president, Lula. Last night, those fears came to fruition as a mob loyal to ex-leader Jair Bolsonaro arrived at the country's Congress, apparently hell-bent on storming their way in, which of course sounds eerily familiar after the events in Washington. Around 1,500 people were arrested, but quite what they hoped to achieve is unclear given the legislature was not actually in session. It did, though, amount to a striking attack on one of the world's major democracies.
Night had fallen by the time security forces reclaimed control of the institutions at the heart of Brazil's divided democracy. The Supreme Court, Congress and Presidential Palace were attacked, offices ransacked, a 3-hour storm of rage directed at President Lula da Silva, who returned to the capital to head a crisis meeting and to seize the political initiative. He called the demonstrators, hardcore followers of defeated rival Jair Bolsonaro, fascists and fanatics, intent on overthrowing his election. There have been 1,500 arrests amid fears of collusion by elements of the military police.
This is the clearest example of people actually demanding military intervention and an overthrow of a democratically elected president. And that has not been seen in the country since the return to democracy in 1985.
Brazil is dangerously polarized. Last October's election saw the far-right former military officer beaten by a razor-thin margin. But he's never conceded defeat and skipped last week's inauguration. His supporters believe the leftist Lula belongs not in office, but in jail on corruption charges. Tonight, pro-government rallies are underway. Bolsonaro has distanced himself from the violence, but could still face extradition from the US, where he's in hospital complaining of stomach pains. At his Florida base, well-wishers have gathered.
Thank you for being the most honorable person that was in our leadership in Brazil.
The protest camps in the capital have been dismantled, but the demonstrations and the disruption to Brazilian democracy seem likely to continue. John Ray, News at 10.
Back here, businesses, charities and schools today learned details of what support, if any, will remain after their current energy price cap ends in April. The government is slashing its support, moving to a far less generous discount scheme that varies based on individual contracts. It could see the typical pub lose the vast majority of its subsidies, but there will be special support for energy-intensive industries. Now, those who still fail to remember their reusable shopping bags each time they go to town should take note of another environmental policy coming down the line. A ban on a range of single-use plastics like cutlery, cups and containers is expected in England by the end of the year. The Environment Secretary said the move will help tackle the billions of pieces of plastic that end up polluting our rivers and seas. It's thought the humble plastic fork can take 2 centuries to biodegrade.
The takeaway is quickly gone, but the plastic can be around a very long time. Now single-use plates and cutlery are to be banned in England. This cafe manager says alternatives can be twice the price.
If we go up more expenses, so there's more expenses going up for us, more businesses they will close down.
Behind this whole issue, there's a stark fact. Wooden cutlery can decompose within 2 years. For plastic, it can be 2 centuries.
Around 1 billion single-use plastic plates and more than 4 billion items of disposable cutlery are used annually in England, and yet only around 10% get recycled. This chip shop in Leeds already uses compostable alternatives, but a full conversion could cost the sector £90 million a year.
My big concerns are the availability of the products. There's also no joined-up thinking when it comes to recycling, so I think councils, local authorities need to get guidance on what consumers should do with packaging when they finish consuming it.
The ban will include a range of items relating to takeaway food and drink, but campaigners say that's not enough.
The UK government has a real responsibility to fix this plastics crisis, and it feels a bit like we're nibbling around the edges of a giant problem here by just banning a few different items.
Similar bans for Scotland and Wales have already been announced as environmental regulations aim to take plastic off the menu. Chris Choi, News at 10.
Footballers often say that representing their country at a World Cup is the sport's greatest prize. So having done that and plenty else besides, the Wales captain Gareth Bale today announced his retirement from the game. Aged just 33, his career has included spells in the Premier League, the Champions League and La Liga, but it was leading his beloved home side on the international stage that he called a dream come true.
His talent was obvious from early on.
It is Bale, and it's a great goal! Wales' youngest ever player!
Scoring his first goal for his country aged just 18, Wales fans couldn't possibly have predicted how this youngster from Cardiff would transform their fortunes. After signing for Tottenham Hotspur as a teenager, Gareth Bale developed a reputation for his blistering pace and for scoring sensational goals. It was a combination which saw him terrorise defences all over Europe for the North London team.
It was scary. I mean, every time he picked the ball up, he'd run 60, 70 yards with the ball and whack it into the back of the net or cross it or do something amazing. It was just an amazing talent. Really laid back, quiet lad, quite shy. But when he got on the pitch and he got the ball, off he went. He was unstoppable.
After scoring nearly 50 goals for Tottenham, Bale was signed by Real Madrid for a world record transfer fee of £85 million in 2013.
Por esta gran acogida. Hala Madrid.
His record there was remarkable and included 5 Champions League titles. In one final, he did this. But for Bale, nothing mattered more than Wales. He led them to a semi-final in their first major tournament in 58 years, before finally helping his beloved Cymru qualify for a World Cup earlier this year.
Gareth Bale, bang!
How fitting that this iconic player's last ever goal was for Wales, and at the World Cup. Rhys Williams, News at 10.
Finally, you could perhaps be forgiven for thinking it all has a distinctly British air. Certainly tonight's rocket launch in Cornwall, the UK's first ever, seems less American might, more make do and mend. The launch pad, an RAF base since the war, the spacecraft, a repurposed jumbo jet. Yet, in its own way, this is being billed as a giant leap for the country's space industry, already supporting tens of thousands of jobs. And Martin is there. Martin, over to you.
Oh, well, there's still great excitement here amongst the thousands who are braving the cold. They've just witnessed a bit of history, Tom. A rocket just like this one starting its mission to propel 9 satellites into space. As we speak, the rocket is still dangling under the wing of a Boeing 747, but the plane just 45 minutes ago took off flawlessly.
Cosmic Girl is now on the runway taking off.
Cosmic Girl is go, carrying a giant rocket under one wing and the hopes of the British space industry on the other. This is the first time satellites have been blasted into orbit from UK soil and is the culmination of years of planning.
The UK want to tap into 10% of the global marketplace, and that's billions. You know, this isn't small. We're looking at 47,000 jobs just alone in the UK that it supports already, and we just want to grow that even more.
Thousands had gathered at Newquay to watch the first flight, braving the bracing wind to see history happen.
I've watched things like this since I was little. I've watched the moon landing. I know this isn't the same thing, but it's just as exciting.
It's just amazing, once in a lifetime.
I'm excited about seeing the rocket because I haven't actually seen a real one before.
Once over the Atlantic, southwest of Ireland, Launcher 1 will be dropped.
Brilliant.
Propelling 9 satellites into orbit at 17,000 miles per hour. A feat of engineering to inspire the next generation of astronauts.
There's a saying that if you can't see it, you can't be it. So the fact that, you know, school kids from Cornwall can go down to Newquay Airport and actually see an industry that's on their doorstep that's crying out for young, fresh, new talent must be very exciting.
We won't know for a few hours if the launch has been a complete success, but plenty will be watching with interest. Martin Stew, News at 10.
And that's all we have time for tonight. Good night. Thanks for watching.